Have you ever gone to a conference or a day-long or week-long meeting, and it's supposed to be really useful, but it ends up just feeling really stressful? It happens. It's really common because maybe it's an internal meeting, like a leadership meeting or an all-company, all-hands meeting. Or maybe your organization has sent you externally, maybe paid a lot of money to have you go somewhere, and you're supposed to be there and be focused. But all of a sudden, your phone, maybe of your computer, they're getting lit up by your team members. Hey, quick question. Maybe they're apologizing, like, sorry, I know you're at this meeting. Or maybe there are other people at your organization or outside of it that have no idea where you are, and they need their answers now. And so you're trying to figure out, what do I do? What do I focus? Are there sessions I can miss? Am I supposed to just work 2 jobs today, like be here at this conference and then go back to my hotel room and answer 8 hours worth of questions? It can feel really stressful. But there are ways to make it feel a lot less stressful and actually create real opportunities for you and for your team. Now, in this video, I'll talk about it. We'll break it down. Because earlier this year, I was leading a session at a company's leadership conference. This is the first time they'd gotten all of the managers in many different states in the US together. And I started talking at the end of the first day. That was my first session. And I said, okay, since we're here, I was talking about management topics, but I said, who actually feels stressed out right now? And people were kind of smiling. I'm like, because whose phone has gotten lit up with requests, even just being away from the day? And almost everyone's hands shot up. But one person, a guy in the back, he said, actually, mine hasn't, and I was really intentional about that, and I'm really proud about that. And so, of course, I'm like, tell me what you did. And he's like, before I went, I created this guide, this FAQ guide of things to know when I'm out, and all sorts of things, like things that need to happen, who's going to be responsible for it. And also I asked the team things that you might normally reach out to me for, but if I'm not available, who could you reach out to? What could wait? And what can we talk about in advance? And so in that meeting, that guide helped that team member, and this was an organization that had apartment communities all over the US. And so a lot of these people had the same jobs. And so they're like, wait, can you send me that document? And he was like, sure. He's like, I just created this so I could actually come and focus. But then I realized it's probably going to let my team members try new things or at least feel like they can make decisions. And he's like, some of these are conversations that team members never realized they actually could decide on their own. So it was actually a lot more helpful than just a document for a day away. Now, you see what I'm getting at. So that company went back and they ended up sharing that document. And I've talked about that since, because that document is exactly what I've talked about at leadership meetings or in manager trainings otherwise. Because it's not just one document for one specific conference, but a lot of what you can do to help you actually be able to focus and not just feel like you have to work 2 jobs, conference you and work you both in the same day. But anytime, whether you're away on vacation or whether you're in meetings, things like that and creating guides for your team can be really helpful to allow you to actually, whether it's step away and be off on vacation without worrying about work constantly falling through the cracks, but it also allows team members to have really clear expectations. In the past 2 weeks of the Manager Method Minute email, I first talked about expectations of managers, like things that every manager should really know to think about, how you communicate and things that are expected of you, that leadership expects of you as a manager, but also your team members, what they expect in a manager that can help them get their work done. And last week I talked about expectations of team members, how you as a manager can set those expectations and make them clear. Because recently when we done our 2025 State of Management Benchmarking Survey and webinar, in our webinar, we asked those attendees, in your organization, how many have actually formal expectations of for managers, have those written down? And only 20% of attendees, which are largely HR contacts, only 20% of those organizations had expectations written down. And so the idea is, so many times you may think people know something, or you may think, okay, they'll reach out to me if they need me, but in the moment, it can feel so stressful when people are reaching out, and not just on those conference days, but every day at work. When you feel like, oh, how do they not know this? Or maybe I didn't realize this was a question, I hadn't thought about this, but one of the things that you can do to be most helpful is to put those together into a guide, like a shareable, whether it's a Google Doc or something that people can add to. And what this can be helpful for is a few reasons. Sometimes it's literally a guide to know, like when I'm out of the office, if you're the manager of the team, and things that your team can ask. Who can they reach out to? Who are the contacts they can reach out to? What are decisions they can make? But thinking about all of those things. Also, generally for team members as well, in my Manager Method Minute last week I talked about how asking your team members, what's something that you now know that feels easy to you, but it took you a while to learn? Or what are things that you wish you knew when you started? Using those to create not just onboarding guides, but those can be super helpful for new team members, but also guides for experienced team members that may learn something at any time. The flip of this that I've talked about long ago in a video was I was leading a session for a large team, a department of a very large company. And in this team, they'd had a lot of change, and even it had some conflict, including with some other departments. And so during the session, one member of the team, who was one of the most, more junior by title, but raised her hand and said, maybe this doesn't make sense, but I always like the Jelly Roll quote. There's a reason the windshield's bigger than the rearview mirror. She's like, I don't know if that makes sense, kind of the common thing that people often say when they speak up. And that's when I paused the session. I was like, wait, hold on a second. And we talked about that and how that's such a great metaphor. Like, when things happen at work is not necessarily dealing with it and addressing it, definitely doing that, but not dwelling on it. And remembering that what's ahead of you, really, there's so much more opportunity than just focusing on the past. And for them, that really helped with some conflict they'd had with a coworker, where they'd raised that. But that tip, there were so many people that were like, hey, well, let me write that down. And so sometimes, whether it's having a guide for people to know what to do when you're going to be out of the office, or having a guide as well on things to know at work, like things to know about the organization, or an acronym guide, like things that everyone should know or that people use, like these letters that people are like, I have no idea what that means, an industry term or organizationally. And so some of those are examples of things that you can do. And some of the most important things to do are, one, to write those down. Because even if you think everybody knows it, there are probably plenty of people that don't, whether it's you that it's going to be out of the office, for a good conference, vacation, or even just day to day. Or tips that people have that they kind of keep in their mind, and often they have their thought of, everybody already knows this, or this is silly, this isn't worth sharing. It is. So telling your team members to share those. But then also things like acronym guide, terms, things that people often, again, don't ask because they don't want to look silly or feel like, everybody else knows this and I don't. And so writing these down, and so whether you're a manager or anyone at the organization, it can really help to have those. But a really important thing as well is to make sure that they're shared. Because likewise, the third story I'll tell in this video is that acronym guide is just a few weeks ago, I was leading a session on collaborative communication. And we talked about some different industry terms. It was healthcare. And one person's like, oh yeah, there's this acronym guide. And other people were like, what are you talking about? They had never heard this. And so some people are like, oh, I share this with every new hire. This is an amazing guide. But people on other teams had no idea and hadn't seen that. And so now that guide is not only being shared, but also being updated before it's shared. So other people can add their points. And so sometimes the aspect at work, whether you're a manager, whether you're an individual contributor, sometimes the most powerful tool you have is communication. And so helping that. And this is where I think that HR can really be helpful to circulate these internally. Okay, how can we make these, how can we make these into resources, make them that everyone knows about these, that we tell people about them. And so doing these, just knowing, putting things down, because if you have a conference coming up, just pausing to think that, what are the questions that my team might need to ask me? And also asking them that, like, what are things that you generally have coming up or you've had in the past that you've needed to reach out to me for? And so putting that together. It won't necessarily stop any questions from coming in. But what it likely can do is make those questions a lot less, so to help you actually focus, but also help your team members develop, make decisions, figure things out. And you can always meet with them after the fact, like, what are decisions that you made that in the past you would have asked me for, but because of this guide or because of conversations we've had, you felt like you could make that. So trying that. And in this week's blog, we'll go through how you can make those. And so some of the structure that you can have for those as well. And so if you don't get my Manager Method Minute newsletter each week, email that links to that, I'll put that in the description. But some of these resources, again, can be completely free, but they can end up saving you so much time and energy and really be helpful to the overall organization.